If you've ever tried to figure out who has access to what in SharePoint, you know that it could be super confusing and quite honestly a mess. As Microsoft has transitioned a lot of things from the old legacy looking classic experience of like the SharePoint 2013-ish days to the new modern experience, there's a lot of things that feel kind of left behind and that haven't been super glued together. And so if you're trying to do an audit or you're trying to figure out why somebody doesn't have access to something, it can become very confusing. If we haven't met, my name is Matt Gibson, and for over 15 years, I've been helping mid-market to Fortune 100 companies maximize their value in Microsoft. And I've spent a lot of time in this SharePoint world specifically. Before you can govern your tenant, you need to understand who has access to what and what that permission model is. And this is super important because this feeds things like Microsoft Search, which then also feeds Copilot. So if you find that users aren't finding the right things when they're prompting, this could be one of those problems as well. So getting the permission structure is super important. And what I'll do today is I'm going to map that to NTFS permissions because there's a lot of overlap and similarities. So if you've been in the game for a while and you understand how file share structures and permissions work, good news is that there are a lot of parallels to how SharePoint is set up. So we'll make those analogies. If you don't, then don't worry. We'll be spending a lot of time focusing on SharePoint specifically. And hey, maybe you'll learn a little bit about file shares in the process. So first, let's just do a real quick recap of NTFS file shares, okay? So let's say that we have a folder at our C drive here of C share, and within there, we have a couple folders. They're nested, right? We can have them at multiple levels. And inside all of these are a bunch of files, right? Now, we can go ahead and set permissions on this first level folder, and everything will inherit from beneath there, right? And whether you're talking about folders or files, these things are called securable objects. Okay, and we'll come back to this here in a second, but basically, this is a fancy way of saying, what is the thing I'm securing? What is the object that I'm securing? The securable object. Okay, and then again, we can break inheritance. So we can say, well, I'm going to set some security on this level, but down here is going to be something totally different, and I want to break security there. You can do that. Of course, there's a whole different religion about whether or not you should, right? But you can, and so it's important to understand. Now, when we're deciding what we want to secure, the securable object, we have to decide who we're going to give those permissions to. Those are called security principals. And we really, on premises, we have two of them, right? We have users and we have groups, okay? And these right here are our security principals. And basically, this is the who we're going to give access to, okay? So we have what we're going to secure, the securable object, who we're going to give access to, the security principal. Then we need to decide what their rights are. Now, this is stored in something called an access control entry. That's a fancy way of just saying what rights does that security principal have to this object, this group have to this folder or file, for example. And so you'll see things like read, write, modify, etc. But this is where we set those permissions, right? So this is basically what they're able to do at that level. Now, there's another thing called the ACL, the Access Control List. And this is the list of all of the permissions that they have access to within that environment. So if you want to say, what are all of the security principals or users and groups that have access to this folder, you'll find that in the Access Control List. And so let's just take a look at a quick diagram here in terms of what that looks like. So within this example, we have the access control list, and we can see that we have 3 entries here with this particular example. And at the very bottom, we have CE admins who have full control to this particular object, whether this is a folder or a file. And so that last row, that's an example of the access control entry. And then seeing all of them in a row is the access control list. And so simply, this is really how you start to secure your file share environment. Okay, perfect. Now, let's go ahead and map this to the SharePoint concept. So we kind of started with securable objects. So let's start there in SharePoint. So first, we have our Microsoft 365 tenant, right? And we have an instance of SharePoint Online in that tenant, okay? Within SharePoint, you can have many different sites, okay? And this is the first level that you can set permissions at. So this is the first securable object layer. So before we had our folders, here we have the sites, okay? And most often, this is really where you want to spend your time managing permissions. We're going to get into lower levels here that you can break inheritance and change the permission model. But if you can, just keep your permissions at the site level. You're going to see why it's easier later from an administrative plain perspective, but also just for your own sanity of not trying to figure out where the permissions are broken and why somebody doesn't have access to this one file in the site, but they have access to everything else. Try to leave it at the site level. Okay, within a site, we can have lists and libraries. Okay, if you want to get really nerdy, libraries are actually just a list. So technically, all you have is a bunch of lists in a SharePoint site, but that's maybe for another video. Let's just keep it simple. You have lists or libraries. This is the next level. So we'll do 1, 2. This is the next level that you can go ahead and set permissions. Now this would break permissions, right? So we would break permissions at the site level and say, I don't want to inherit your permissions anymore. I want to do new permissions at this list or library level. Going back to what we talked about, if you need to set permissions if you need to change permissions to not just be the site level, again, try to only leave it here, okay? So if you have like one document library that just makes sense to be on that site but needs its own permission model, that's not going to be too terrible to try to keep track of that one instance. But of course, just use your best judgment, use common sense. The more often this happens, the more complex it's going to be to manage. Okay, lists have items, libraries can have folders and files. Okay, I'm going to technically lump all these things together. Again, if we want to get really nerdy, a file is an item, but an item's not a file, kind of whiskey, bourbon, bourbon, whiskey kind of analogy here. So you can then set different permissions at this level as well, right? So let's go ahead and just kind of group these here. So this is one level. Then you have lists and libraries are another level, and your sites are another level. So these are the 3 different securable objects, if you will, that you can break inheritance and set permissions at. Okay, so that maps to our folders and files in the share. What about security principles? Okay, so we have a few different types. Of course, we have users. So at any point in time, you can assign a user directly to any one of these things if you'd like to. Really easy. The next is we have SharePoint groups, okay? And let's talk about these for a moment because this is really the important piece in terms of how permissions get set in SharePoint sites. So every SharePoint site has SharePoint groups, okay? And when you create a new site, you're going to get 3 of them out of the box. You're going to get a members, owners, and visitors. Okay, and then there's a prefix of the site name. So if you have a marketing site, it'll be marketing members, marketing owners, etc. But you're going to get each one of these groups. Now, members get what's called contribute access, and we'll get into these in here in a moment. Owners have full control, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then visitors have read-only access to the site. Okay, now, if we just focus on the SharePoint side of things, you can put your users into any one of these 3 groups. And again, these are configured at the site level at first. So if you give somebody member access to the site, they have contribute, which means that they can modify any item, file, folder, etc. in the site. And again, that should be okay. We want to leave it at that level. We want our information architecture structured so that we can just give them, hey, you could do whatever you want to within this site. That's what we want to be doing. Okay, so those 3 groups come out of the box. Now, the next group type, and again, this is where we get confusing. We have a couple different group types here. we have M365 groups, okay? Now, let's talk about what M365 groups are. So in this particular example, this shows you what an M365 group can include. So what happens is when Microsoft rolled out Microsoft Teams, they needed a place to store files within Teams, and a great place for that is SharePoint. So when you create a team in Microsoft Teams and you go to the Files tab, underneath there is actually a SharePoint site on the back end, and that's where all your files are going. And to make it so that you didn't have to, if you added a member to a team, and make it so that you didn't have to then remember to go to that SharePoint site and add them as a member there, they introduced a centralized topic called Microsoft 365 Groups. Now, these live in Entra ID, so you'll see them alongside your other security groups and other group types in Entra. But what this does, and where this is nice, is now if I add a member to the team in Teams, they automatically are a member in the SharePoint site as well. And we'll dig into a little bit of a demo and show you how all this is stitched together. But then what's nice is now if I add a planner to that team, or if I add one of these other services here to that team, they're automatically going to get access because of that centralized group. So it makes this nice, but it's kind of confusing because now I've got different group types. Okay, so we'll dig into that again in a little bit here. But the way that this maps to the SharePoint groups is in an M365 group, you have owners and members. Now, these are not nested groups. It's not like you have an owners and a members within the M365 group. Think of it more like a logical partition where you have, hey, all of these people are a part of this group, but these people are specifically owners and these people are specifically members. And that's how it's sort of set up. Where it's nice, though, is that these, when you spin up a SharePoint site that is backed by a Microsoft 365 group, they automatically do this mapping here for you, where the M365 group owners are associated to the owners group in SharePoint, and the members group is associated with the members group in SharePoint. So that makes it really nice, right? Because then if we add members, we automatically know that they just have the member permission in our SharePoint site, which is real cool. Okay. Now, we also have a third group type here of Entra security groups. Okay. Now, this can be a cloud native group. You went into Entra and you said, give me a new security group, and it gave you one. Or this could be synced from Active Directory, right? Where it's a security group that you created on premises and it's synced up. Okay. The only thing that really changes here for the purposes of this discussion is just where you would go to add users to that group. If it's on-prem, obviously you have to do it in Active Directory. And if it's cloud native, you can do it there as well. Okay. Now, Entra security groups also have owners and members. But where this gets confusing is it does not automatically map to those SharePoint groups nicely like the M365 group ones do. In fact, if you add somebody to the owners group, they're not part of that members partition of that group, they're not going to get access to something. So you can add an Entra security group to one of your SharePoint groups, or you could just bypass those SharePoint groups and give the Entra security group a permission level directly. That's possible, but you have to make sure that everybody is at least in members, and you can duplicate it. So you could say, and we'll look at our example, Adele is an owner and a member, and that's fine, though from the security group perspective, they're still considered an owner. But if you want them to get access to the thing that you're giving them in SharePoint, they need to be also duplicated in that members partition as well. Okay, so again, we have a lot more security principles here, and it could be kind of challenging. So one thing I would urge you to do is keep this standardized, right? If you're going to manage your life cycle, there's a whole nother series we can do on group life cycle management, but make sure you kind of pick. Certainly don't go throwing users, right? Let's just go ahead and agree on that. You very rarely want to just assign a user direct access to the SharePoint site. You're typically going to be doing one of these two things here, either your Entra groups or M365 groups. And in some rare cases, you might just do it directly inside of SharePoint. Okay, so let's switch over here to our admin center and take a look at what this looks like in real life. So I'm in the SharePoint Administrative Center here. And the first thing I want to show you is it can be confusing to determine what sites are groups connected, M365 groups connected, versus which ones are not. So one way to do that is if we scroll all the way over here, we have this M365 group, right? And if you do not see this column, then just keep scrolling all the way over and come over to customize columns, click that and go ahead and check the M365 group and you'll see that. These are filterable, so if I just want my M365 groups, I can go ahead and filter to yes. Another really quick way is that if you see this Teams icon, that means that there's also a team associated with that SharePoint site, which automatically means that it's backed by an M365 group. So that's another really quick way. But you can see here that my biz dev does not have a team associated with it. But if I scroll over, it is an M365 group. Okay, so just go ahead and keep that in mind. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at one that's M365 group with a team. And I can open the site by clicking the site name and then come over to membership. Now let's talk about what all these different panels here mean. The owners and members here map to the M365 group in Entra, which we'll flip to in a second. The site admins, this is the folks that have site collection administrator. And we can see the site owners. We also have the marketing owners in here as well. And then the site members are associated with the marketing members from our M365 group. So these map to the permissions we talked about earlier in terms of members, owners, and visitors. And we can see here that we don't have any visitors in this particular example. Okay, so if we come over to groups here, and I'm in the Entra Admin Center, I'm going to come to all groups, and let me go ahead and search for marketing. Okay, so the first thing we could see is I have my marketing group here, and it is Microsoft 365. That's the group type. So now if I click this, and I scroll down, I could first see again that it's a Microsoft 365 group, and I can see that it has these services associated with it right now, which is Outlook for a shared mailbox and shared calendar, SharePoint, and Teams. Okay, so we saw that in the Admin Center. We can see that again here in Entra. Now, we also over on the blade here, we have owners and members. So if I look at my owner, I'm an owner in this particular group. And I'm also a member, right? So from right here, we could go ahead and add, let's say, Alex. And now Alex is a member of this M365 group, which means that they have contribute access through the M365 group to the SharePoint site, but also to the team that is associated with it, right? Okay, very cool. Now, let's go ahead and look at the actual marketing site itself. So if I go ahead and click this item right here, I can come down to site permissions, and we can again see how these are all mapped here. So let me go ahead and expand these. We have our marketing owners, which have full control, and then that is again the same thing as this M365 group owners, which maps back to here. So you can see it did all this for us. I didn't set any of this up. Okay, let's come back to our site. We can see the marketing members have edit or contribute rights to this site as well. Now, if you're used to the old school SharePoint permissions model, you can click this advanced permissions page. These are the SharePoint groups we talked about earlier, right? So this is the members, owners, and visitors that we talked about earlier. Now, if I go ahead and click into the marketing members section, you can see here marketing members. This is the M365 group that's associated with that SharePoint group. So all of this mapping has been done for us, okay? So in an M365 group, I would encourage you to leave this the way it is. Do not break inheritance. Don't change a bunch of permissions if you can so help it. Now, let's go ahead and look at a site that is not associated with a group. So this BizDev example is associated with a group. It's going to look exactly the same, but let's take a look at this communication site. So we can see here that it does not say group up at the top. Okay, if I go to any one of these other ones, it says private group. That means it's a Microsoft 365 group. If I check the communication site and come on over to here, no, it is not associated with an M365 group. That means that the permissions are managed directly in that SharePoint site. Now again, I can come to the membership tab and I can configure my permissions right here from the admin center, but this will only apply to the site level. So I can set my owners, I can set my members, and I can set my site visitors, right? So in this example, you can see in my site members, I have a group here called my security group. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like over here in Entra. So let me go ahead and search for my security. And we can see here that we have a group, an Entra, but it's a security group. So this is an Entra security group. Now in this particular example, this is just a cloud one, but it could look the same if it's on premises, and you would see information here about whether or not it was synchronized. So if we click into here, I could see again, this is a security group. I don't get any of those links at the bottom of it being associated with any services because that's not how this works. But if I look, I can see that I also have members and owners. And this is that weird example where I want to, if you only leave somebody in the owners part and you have them, nested in here in the site members, they will not get access. You have to duplicate that person in the members partition as well. So just kind of a weird nuance, but super important. Okay, let's take a really quick look at an example of broken inheritance. So I'm going to come to my document library of my marketing site, and I'm going to break inheritance on this particular item, right? So this is the next level. This is a library. I'm going to click the gear and go to library settings, and then go to more library settings. Okay, let me scroll in a little bit here. Under the permissions and management, I'm going to go to permissions for this document library, and you're going to see a screen that looked very similar to the one before. So we could see here, this library inherits from its parent. By default, everything inherits from the site level. Okay, I can then click this button to stop inheriting permissions. It's going to give me a prompt saying, do you know what you're doing? I'm going to click OK. And then now you'll be able to see it even clearly calls it out. This library has unique permissions. Okay. Now, if I want to grant permissions, I'm going to do exactly what we said not to, and I'm just going to go ahead and give direct access to Alex Wilbur here, and I will not send them an email, and click share. Okay. Now, if I refresh this page, you'll see that Alex has permissions, but if Alex isn't in any one of the SharePoint site groups up here, they won't have access. Even if you wanted to, you could delete these permissions from this library and say the only person who can get to this library now is Alex, okay? Where this gets confusing is if you're doing this in multiple levels. And so at any level, whether it's the folder level, the item level, the library level, when you go to the settings and you go to the permissions, you have this check permissions. This is a really good way to see what the permissions they have to that particular object is and where it came from. So if I try to do Adele, there's none, right? Because we removed her. We removed the group that she was a part of. But now if I do a check for Alex, then I could see that Alex has edit permissions. So this goes back to, you would need to do this on every site at every level if you have a bunch of broken permissions and you want to figure out why that person can't get to that item. So if you are fielding a help desk ticket or troubleshooting an issue and you're like, they keep getting an access denied on this folder and I can't figure out why, that check permissions button will tell you why they cannot have access to that particular item. This isn't super manageable at scale, right? So you basically have a couple different options. The first would be a PowerShell script where you write a PowerShell script, maybe you generate it with AI or you grab it from the internet, and it can take Microsoft Graph and list out all the permissions for you and kind of give you a permissions report. That's certainly helpful. If you're slick with PowerShell and you understand what you're doing there, that's a great way of doing it without any additional cost. If you are looking for governance tools, two that we have used and would recommend are ShareGate and SysKit. And they have a nice interface where you can then see in a GUI way, navigate through the structure, see what the permissions are. It'll give you a nice visual of what has broken inheritance or not. And it gives you that central plane where you can get to different levels. If you have that complex permission structure, those are great tools to help highlight those and potentially help you clean them up as well, because you really don't want to have that nested inheritance structure. So hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully this helped you become a SharePoint permissions guru. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'd love to help you out. Thank you so much for watching.